Welcome back to Newcastle Family History Society podcasts. The Newcastle Family History Society, located on Awabakal land in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, provides support for those interested in family history. This is the third podcast in the Newcastle Family History Society series focusing on the records for children admitted to New South Wales industrial schools during the mid to late 1800s. These various resources have been used extensively during Jane Ison's ongoing investigation into girls and boys admitted to either Newcastle, Biloela or the Vernon before 1890. These podcasts are intended to assist researchers better understand the documents available. In episodes 1 and 2, Jane gave overviews of the admission and discharge registers for the girls' schools at Newcastle between 1867 and 1871, and Biloela between 1871 and 1887. In this podcast, she will outline the records from the first boys' school, the Industrial School Ship Vernon, that operated in Sydney Harbour from 1867 until it was replaced in 1892. Jane will explain how family researchers can locate these documents and will outline some difficulties that may be encountered when using them.
During the 1860s, the New South Wales government was in a bind regarding juvenile crime. By this time, gangs of children ran wild in the streets of Sydney. Poverty was a problem. Accidents or childbirth could result in deaths that destroyed family stability. There was often no extended family around to assist. There was no welfare for anyone in need. There was no regulation, and some unscrupulous individuals began to run their own schools and subsequently took advantage of the children in their care. Genuine charitable and religious institutions were struggling under the load. The Act for the Relief for Destitute Children was a big and expensive step taken by the government to provide welfare and safety to children and to solve many of society's problems. I've spoken about the girls, but what about the boys? Just like the girls, boys were subject to arrest if they were found vagrant or in the company of thieves or prostitutes. They also appeared in court and, if found guilty under the Act, were sentenced to a minimum of 12 months aboard the Industrial School Ship Vernon, and after 1892, the replacement ship, the Sopron. While on board, they received an education and vocational training so they could better earn an honest living and contribute to society. The following outline appeared in the Sydney Mail and New South Wales Advertiser in December 1877, just over 10 years after the first admissions were made. It gives a history of the Vernon and provides a glimpse of the government's intention for vocations for boys.
The Vernon was built in 1839 for the Messrs. Green of Blackwall as an East India passenger ship, and was a favourite ship on the Calcutta and Bombay line. She was fitted with side wheels and had an engine of small power. One wheel was washed away off the Cape of Good Hope, and they were then taken away altogether. In February 1867, she was fitted up for a nautical school under the Industrial Schools Act of 1866. The first boys were received on board on the 20th of May. Since then, 697 have passed through the books, and 452 have been apprenticed to various callings, principally as farm and general servants. The first apprentice went to sea and is still following that profession. The demand for shore work far exceeds that for the sea, unless the grown lads were permitted to join the Navy. The majority of those apprenticed have turned out well. Some are in Queensland and Victoria, but they are generally scattered over New South Wales working for themselves. Nearly all the reports from masters who have apprentices are favourable. The work of the ship commences in summer at 4:30 a.m. and in winter at 6 a.m. with breakfast at 7. Then schoolwork and trades all day with dinner at noon. On Wednesday forenoon there is general sail drill, and on Saturdays they clean the ship. On Sunday, weather permitting, boys go to church. On Friday morning, they are examined at the guns, and occasionally they are landed on cockatoo and drilled with rifles.
So, who were these boys, and how do you know if your ancestor was one of them? Since I first undertook research into the boys and girls committed to the industrial schools, it has become very evident that far more boys were admitted to the Vernon and its replacement ship, the Sobron, than there were girls admitted to industrial schools or reformatories. The article above reported that by December 1877, nearly 700 boys had been admitted to the Vernon, but by this same date, only about 400 girls had been sent to Newcastle or Biloela. It has also become evident that the names of less than half the boys admitted to the Vernon between 1867 and 1886 have survived to reach state archives. Unlike my success in identifying the names and sometimes family details of missing Newcastle and Biloela girls, recreating a list of admissions of missing boys is far more complex and far less successful. This podcast will outline the major limitations in researching ancestors who were Vernon boys. I will also outline the difficulties descendants may have in confirming whether their ancestor was even sent to the Vernon. A researcher's first clue to any industrial school admission, either boy or girl, is likely to be from an article in either the newspaper or the police gazette, both of which are easily accessed through Trove's online newspapers. These online articles will provide an approximate admission date and perhaps some family information. In fact, for the first admissions to the Vernon, the particulars of committal often came directly from newspaper clippings at the time that were routinely glued into the register. Additional information for each boy will have been added by the superintendent. Other researchers may uncover an admission through family stories, and many will locate some other record, such as a New South Wales jail record, identifying a connection to one of the ships. Because an admission was considered to be a part of an individual's previous criminal history, any jail record identifying the Vernon or Sobron as a location should be considered as evidence of an admission, even if nothing else can be located. And as you will hear, the lack of records is a big problem. The original Vernon records, New South Wales State Archives, NRS 3906, and those of the Sobron, NRS 3902, are held at New South Wales State Archives. The Vernon admissions commenced in May 1867 in a blank ledger, probably containing 250 pages. For over a year, the name of each admission was recorded across 2 facing pages. From September 1868, this system changed so that 2 boys were recorded on each double page. At some stage before October 1883, the government designed a 2-page pro forma to record personal information so that details of each boy again appeared on a double page. There was never a discharge register for boys, as admissions and discharges were recorded in the same book. There are 12 surviving registers in total, 7 volumes naming Vernon committals, and a further 5 volumes recording admissions to the Sobron. These original records may be accessed on microfilm and on Ancestry. So, if your Vernon boy was admitted before July 1877 or after April 1886, then there is likely to be a wealth of information about him and his family in one of these 12 surviving registers. Other than deliberate lies told at the time of admission or difficulty in transcribing the handwriting, the greatest problem for family historians is accessing the registers. Unlike the names of industrial school girls who were admitted, there is no easily available online index for industrial school boys unless they were younger than 8 and were temporarily admitted from the ship to Billawheeler until they could handle shipboard life. In these cases, boys' names do appear on the online Child Welfare Index available on the New South Wales State Archives website, and their original Billawheeler admissions and discharges appear in the Billawheeler records that I outlined in previous podcasts. My research has uncovered that there were no young boys ever admitted to Newcastle, but quite a number were admitted to Billawheeler. Other than these young boys, all other admissions must be checked with library access or a personal subscription to Ancestry, or on the microfiche index compiled in about 1994 by the volunteers at the Australian Genealogy Education Centre in Kiama. This index shows names and dates of admission and whatever discharge particulars were recorded in the surviving registers. Accessing this fiche and an appropriate fiche reader is limited to specialist libraries. While the Colonial Secretary's letters received index is now available online at State Archives, and while this index does name some Vernon and Sabron admissions, as a whole it contains far fewer mentions of industrial school boys than it does industrial school girls. It therefore should not be considered a comprehensive list of admissions. The Colonial Secretary's letters received 1826 to 1896 will be the subject of a future podcast in this resources series. But what if you have a name and there is no surviving admission? There will be many researchers in this predicament. As far as can be ascertained, all admissions to the Sabron have survived, but there are some Vernon records that are misfiled, and no records survive for the almost 9 years between July 1877 and March 1886. And this is a major limitation for those researching Vernon boys. It is currently impossible to accurately calculate how many actual registers did not reach State Archives, but it is believed that at least 4 didn't make it. The surviving registers are in generally good condition, but because of constant use, and as would be expected, each register deteriorated over time, and very occasionally an individual name and any accompanying details detached from the binding. This individual record was then either misfiled or was lost. The Vernon admissions were numbered, and for some boys arrested in May and June 1867, numbering is either intermittent and random or non-existent. There are a number of misfiled names for these boys. David Bowie's name, yes, David Bowie, appears at the beginning of the 1868 records. Charles Little, John Little, and John Harvey appear at the beginning of the 1869 records, and John Cassidy's name appears in the 1870 records. I remind researchers to think about what they are viewing, as with these individuals there will be no correlation between an admission date in the register and any newspaper article that is found. Between 1877 and 1886, with the inexplicable exception of the admission of Charles Webster in October 1883, no other names or details remain, and this 9-year gap accounts for hundreds of missing boys. This gap has been confirmed by New South Wales State Archives. Using the figures from the annual superintendent's reports, a calculation provides the astounding number of a minimum of 930 boys whose names are mostly unknown. Calculating exactly how many names have not survived is ongoing. Only the original annual reports are likely to identify exactly how the two superintendents calculated the number of boys readmitted each year. This calculation is believed to have differed between James Mean, who died in 1878, and Frederick Nettenstein, who replaced him. My in-depth study of the records strongly suggests that Mean rarely, if ever, re-entered the name of a boy, whereas Nettenstein seems to have always re-entered the boy's name if he was returned. It is therefore not yet possible to deduct known admissions from total admissions made until the 30th of June 1886. What is certain is that by the 30th of June 1888, 2,010 boys had been admitted to the Vernon. An added problem in calculating total admissions is that during this period, boarding out was commenced. This practice began during the period when the records have not survived, so an arrival cannot be assured, especially if the boy was young. From at least as early as 1886, some boys appear in newspapers, in transit jail admissions, or in Billawheeler records as Vernon admissions, but were boarded out instead of going aboard the ship. In addition to the volumes that have not survived, there are also individuals whose admissions cannot be found in the remaining registers. Details of the boys named Edward Cassidy and the brothers John and Thomas Cassidy, alias Cuddy, who were admitted in December 1871, cannot be found. Research into these boys is ongoing. The sheer number of unidentified admissions presents a shocking figure for family historians, as many of these children went on to marry and have families. This important aspect of their early life, and potentially also their family details, are therefore lost to their descendants. Might your ancestor be one of them? Ask yourself these questions. Is my ancestor difficult to track or locate? Was my ancestor a bit of a rogue? Did my ancestor end up a considerable distance from his family? Did my ancestor appear in the indents of any coastal traders as an apprentice? If the answer to any of these questions is yes, then you too may have a Vernon admission. Could you identify some of these missing boys? Just as has been done with the girls in Newcastle and Billawheeler, some names have not survived. A list of names of the boys is being compiled. There is a minimum of 930 boys, and this number is probably closer to 1,100. Currently, I have found about 720 names collected from a variety of sources, and the search is ongoing. Trove has provided the most names, but the Police Gazette, the Randwick Asylum records, and any in-transit records from jail registers, especially from Bathurst and Goulburn, have disclosed more. If you do find a Vernon ancestor who was admitted between July 1877 and March 1886, and I have not identified him, or if you believe that one of the boys identified on my site under the Vernon tab may be your ancestor, please contact me.
The Newcastle Family History Society hopes that this podcast has given you some insight into the complexity of finding Vernon admissions. If you find a missing boy whose name does not appear under the Vernon tab on her website, nis.wikidot.com, Jane would appreciate you making contact through the website or with an email to the NFHS Secretary on nfhsinc@gmail.com, who will connect you with Jane. In the next podcast in this series, Jane will discuss the Colonial Secretary letters received 1826 to 1896 and how it relates to children, especially those admitted to the industrial schools. Thank you for listening to Newcastle Family History Society podcasts.